There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They knock on the door dressed in the familiar clothes of a Tuesday night, or a shared pizza, or the low murmur of a movie you are not really watching. You do not recognize them as architects of your future. You see them only as minutes passing, as the steady, unassuming rhythm of a life you have come to know. And then, the disguise falls away. A single question, a gesture, a shift in the air, and the ordinary moment reveals itself to be a threshold. You are standing on one side of your life, and in the space of a single breath, you are invited to cross over to the other. You can refuse, of course. You can pretend you did not see the door, did not hear the invitation. But you know, in the quietest part of your soul, that from that moment on, your life will be defined by the choice you made, to step across, or to turn back to the familiar room you suddenly no longer recognize. For me, that moment arrived on a Tuesday. It was late, past midnight, and the only light in my apartment came from the muted blues and oranges of the television screen. Rain was tracing lazy, intersecting paths down the large window of my living room. The sound a soft, percussive hush that had become the soundtrack to our evenings. Sam was beside me on the couch, a familiar weight, a comforting warmth that I had meticulously trained myself to accept as nothing more than friendship. He had been quiet for the better part of an hour, his head resting on my shoulder, a position that had long ago graduated from a startling anomaly to a cherished, unspoken ritual. I was a cartographer of these moments, mapping the precise weight of his head, the texture of his worn sweatshirt against my cheek, the soft, even cadence of his breathing as he hovered on the edge of sleep. I had built a fortress around my heart with these details, a place where I could love him safely, silently, without ever risking the beautiful, fragile architecture of the life we shared. His voice, when it came, was so low it was almost part of the rain, a murmur against my collarbone. "Leo?" I made a soft sound of acknowledgement, my eyes still fixed on the screen, afraid that looking at him would shatter the spell. My entire body was a tightly coiled spring of awareness, a state of being I had learned to live inside whenever he was this close. I was conscious of the exact point where his shoulder pressed against mine, the way his thigh rested alongside my own, a line of heat that seemed to burn straight through the denim of my jeans. It was an excruciating and exquisite form of torture, one I willingly submitted to again and again. He shifted, lifting his head from my shoulder. The sudden absence of his weight was a physical shock, a loss I felt in my very bones. I finally turned to look at him. In the flickering, cinematic light, his face was a landscape of soft shadows and uncertain expressions. His eyes, usually so bright with easy laughter or focused intensity, were dark and deep, searching mine for something I could not name. The air between us changed. The comfortable silence thickened, becoming heavy with unspoken words, with years of things I had locked away. It felt like the moment a photograph develops in the darkroom, the instant an image begins to ghost into existence on the blank paper, fragile and uncertain. He did not look away. The silence stretched, pulling taut. And then he asked the question that dismantled my entire world. "Do you ever think about me naked?" The words hung in the air, stark and unbelievable. They were not delivered with a smirk or a playful nudge. They were quiet, serious, and profoundly vulnerable. It was a question stripped bare of all pretense, a raw nerve exposed in the dim light of my living room. My mind went utterly blank. Every carefully constructed defense I had built, every platitude about friendship, every rule I had set for myself, crumbled into dust. It was like watching a city fall in slow motion. The question was not a proposition, it was a confession. And it was a confession that mirrored the one I had been hiding in the deepest chamber of my own heart for nearly a decade. I could not speak. I could not breathe. I could only stare at him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silence that followed was different. It was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It was the sound of a choice being presented, the sound of that threshold appearing between us. Sam's gaze did not waver, but a flicker of something, fear, regret, crossed his face. He seemed to hold his breath, waiting for my reaction, for a rejection that would allow him to retreat, to laugh it off as a joke, to rebuild the comfortable walls between us. But I gave him nothing. I was frozen, caught between the terror of what this meant and the soaring, impossible hope that was unfurling in my chest. Then, slowly, deliberately, he broke the stillness. His hands went to the hem of his sweatshirt. He pulled it up and over his head in one smooth, quiet motion. The television cast a fleeting glow across the pale skin of his chest, the defined lines of his stomach, the shadows that settled in the hollow of his throat. He tossed the sweatshirt onto the arm of the couch, his eyes never leaving mine. It was not a seduction. It was an act of surrender. He was showing me his own vulnerability, answering his own question with a terrifying, beautiful honesty. He was waiting for me to do the same. And in that moment, watching him, I knew I could no longer stand on the safe side of the door. I had to decide if I was brave enough to step through. Before that Tuesday night, there was a foundation of nearly 10 years, built brick by brick with shared laughter, late-night conversations, and the kind of easy companionship that feels less like a choice and more like a law of nature. I met Sam in my sophomore year of college. I was the quiet kid in the back of a cavernous lecture hall, the one who saw the world through the frame of a camera lens even when I did not have my camera with me. I was studying photography, which felt like a polite way of saying I was studying people without ever having to actually talk to them. I was more comfortable with light and shadow than with handshakes and small talk. I documented moments. I did not participate in them. I was a ghost in my own life, content to observe from the periphery. Sam was the opposite. He was not a ghost. He was a weather system. He entered a room, and the atmospheric pressure changed. He was a business major, impossibly smart and effortlessly charming, the kind of person who collected friends like other people collected stamps. He was all bright energy and quick smiles, a whirlwind of activity. I remember watching him from across the campus quad, surrounded by a rotating cast of friends, laughing with an openness that I found both fascinating and intimidating. He was a sun, and I was a planet in a distant, unlit orbit, content to watch his light from afar. Our worlds collided because of a shared elective, something utterly forgettable about the history of Renaissance art. I was there for the visual feast. He was there, as he later told me, because it fit perfectly into his schedule between microeconomics and a varsity swim practice. He sat next to me on the first day, not out of any particular design, but because it was the only seat left. He smelled faintly of chlorine and coffee. He turned to me, stuck out a hand, and gave me a smile that felt like it could power a small city. "I'm Sam," he'd said. "I have a feeling I'm going to need help in this class." And just like that, he was in my orbit. Or rather, he had pulled my quiet, lonely orbit into his own gravitational field. True to his word, he needed help. He had a brilliant mind for logic and systems, but the subtleties of chiaroscuro and the emotional weight of a Bellini painting were a foreign language to him. I, on the other hand, lived in that language. So we started studying together. At first, it was just in the library, our textbooks spread out under the green-shaded lamps. I would talk about composition and color theory, and he would listen with a focused intensity that surprised me. He did not just want to pass the class. He genuinely wanted to understand what I saw. "Explain it to me again," he would say, pointing to a reproduction of a Caravaggio. "Why does the light matter so much?" "It's just light." And I would try. I would talk about how the light directed the eye, how it created drama, how the darkness was just as important as the illuminated subject because it held the secrets, the fear, the negative space that gave the light its meaning. I was talking about painting, but I felt like I was explaining myself. He would nod slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration, and then a look of dawning comprehension would light up his face. "Oh," he'd say, "okay, I think I get it. It's about what you don't see in those moments." I felt seen in a way I never had before. Our study sessions bled out of the library and into the rest of our lives. We started eating together in the dining hall, walking to classes, and soon, he was dragging me to parties I would have never attended on my own. I would stand in a corner with a cup in my hand, feeling deeply out of place, until he would reappear by my side, handing me a fresh drink and steering me into a conversation. He was my translator, my ambassador to the world of normal human interaction. He never made me feel like a project or a charity case. He simply made space for me, a quiet island in his bustling archipelago of friends. "This is Leo," he would say, with an arm slung around my shoulder. "He's brilliant. He sees things no one else does, and people, drawn in by his warmth, would accept me without question. The moment I knew my feelings for him had crossed a line from friendship into something deeper, something more perilous, was a quiet one. It was the end of junior year. We were packing up our dorm rooms. His was a chaotic explosion of clothes, books, and swim gear. Mine was neat, already mostly in boxes. He was sitting on his bare mattress, flipping through one of my photo albums, a collection of black and white images I had taken over the year. They were mostly landscapes, architectural details, stark and lonely things. But scattered throughout were pictures of him. Sam, laughing at a joke I'd made. Sam, asleep in the library with a book on his chest. Sam, emerging from the pool, water streaming from his hair, his face set with determination. I had never shown these to him, or to anyone. They felt too personal, too much like a confession. He paused on a photo of himself sitting on a bench, looking out over the campus lake, lost in thought. I had taken it from a distance, without his knowledge. The light was perfect, catching the line of his jaw, the slight frown of concentration on his face. He looked at it for a long time. "You make me look. I don't know," he said, his voice soft. "You make me look like I'm thinking about something important." "You probably were," I said, my voice tight. He looked up at me, the photo album resting in his lap. "I was probably thinking about what was for dinner," he said with a small smile. "But you make it look like more. You make everything look like more." And in that moment, with the afternoon sun slanting through the dusty window, illuminating the space between us, I felt it. A profound, aching love. It was not just admiration or affection. It was a deep, seismic shift in my soul. I loved him. I loved the way he moved, the way he laughed, the way he tried to understand my quiet world. I loved the way he made me feel less like a ghost. And it terrified me, because I knew, with an artist's certainty about light and shadow, that this love was a thing that had to live in the dark. To bring it into the light would be to risk burning everything down. So I packed it away. I put that love into a box and stored it in the attic of my heart, alongside all the other unspoken things. Our friendship was too precious, too vital. He was the anchor of my life. Losing him was not an option. So I became a master of self-deception. I told myself that the intense joy I felt when he called was just happiness to hear from a friend. That the physical ache I felt when he left was just the normal sadness of a goodbye. I learned to live with the constant, low-grade hum of my own yearning. It became the background noise of my life, a sound I eventually learned to ignore most of the time. After college, we moved to the same city. I found a small, light-filled apartment and started a freelance photography career, shooting portraits, weddings, anything that paid the bills, while working on my personal projects in the quiet hours. Sam, with his brilliant mind for systems, was snapped up by a major tech consulting firm. His job required him to travel constantly. He lived out of a suitcase, flying from one city to another, designing and implementing complex software solutions for faceless corporations. He had an apartment, a sleek, minimalist place downtown that he was rarely ever in. It felt more like a storage unit for his expensive suits than a home. My apartment became his home base. It was the place he came to decompress after a week of sterile hotel rooms and high-pressure meetings. He had a key. He would let himself in, drop his luggage by the door, and collapse onto my worn, comfortable couch as if he were a soldier returning from a war. I would make him tea, or pour him a whiskey, and he would slowly, piece by piece, return to himself. He would shed the skin of the high-powered consultant and become Sam again. My Sam. The one who left his socks on the floor and ate cereal for dinner and could talk for hours about a stupid movie. These were the years of our established friendship, the bedrock on which everything else was built. We had our routines. Movie nights. Sunday brunches. He had girlfriends, a string of them, bright, successful women who were a much better fit for his world than I ever could be. I was always gracious. I would meet them, smile, and talk to them about their work, all the while feeling a cold, hard knot tightening in my stomach. I was the best friend. The stable, reliable, safe best friend. The role was a familiar one, a costume I wore so well I sometimes forgot I was wearing it. Sam would bring them around, and they would invariably say something like, "Sam has told me so much about you. It's so great you two are so close," and I would smile and say, "He's my brother," a lie. A necessary, soul-crushing lie. I watched him fall in love, and I watched his heart break. I was the one he called when a relationship ended. I was the one who sat with him in the dark, listening to him try to figure out what went wrong. I was the steady hand, the calm voice, the keeper of his stories. And every time, a small, treacherous part of me would feel a flicker of hope, a terrible, guilty relief. It was a dark, ugly thing, that hope, and I would shove it down, ashamed of myself. I wanted his happiness. I truly did. But I was also just a man who had been in silent love for a very long time. I was the darkness in the painting, the negative space that gave his bright, illuminated life its shape. And I had resigned myself to that role. It was enough. It had to be. The shift was not a sudden earthquake, but a slow, almost imperceptible tilting of the ground beneath our feet. It began about 2 years before that rainy Tuesday night. Sam's job, which had always been demanding, became relentless. The projects grew larger, the stakes higher, the travel more grueling. He was living on airplanes and in antiseptic hotel rooms, his life governed by time zones and deadlines. The bright energy that had always defined him began to fray at the edges. The easy smile was still there, but it did not always reach his eyes. The laughter came a little slower. He was a star burning too brightly, consuming its own fuel at an unsustainable rate. He started coming back from his trips not just tired, but hollowed out. He would call me from an airport in Chicago or a hotel in Singapore, his voice thin and stretched across the thousands of miles. He would talk about the project, the client, the endless meetings, but underneath it, I could hear what he was not saying. I could hear the profound, crushing loneliness. He was surrounded by people all day, but he was utterly alone. He was a performer playing to an empty theater. I remember one particular night that felt like a turning point. He had been in London for 3 weeks on a project that had gone completely off the rails. He was supposed to be home on a Friday, but he kept getting delayed. He finally landed late on a Sunday night. He called me from the taxi. "Hey," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You up?" "Always for you," I said, a familiar refrain. "Welcome home. How was it?" "Don't ask," he sighed. "Listen, is it okay if I just come to your place? I don't think I can face my empty apartment right now." "Of course," I said immediately. The doors unlocked. When he arrived, he looked like a ghost. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loosened, and there were dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes. He dropped his suitcase by the door with a thud that seemed to echo the depletion in his own body. He did not say anything. He just walked over to the couch, fell onto it, and buried his face in one of the cushions. I did not press him. I went to the kitchen and made him a cup of chamomile tea, the way I always did. I put it on the coffee table beside him and sat down in the armchair across from him, giving him space. For a long time, he just lay there, motionless. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren. I watched him, my heart aching with a fierce, protective helplessness. I wanted to smooth the lines of exhaustion from his face, to absorb his weariness into my own body, to build a wall around him and keep the harshness of the world at bay. Finally, he rolled over and looked at me. His eyes were bleak. "They're selling the company," he said, his voice flat. "The one we've been working with. The whole project is being scrapped. 3 months of 14-hour days. For nothing." "Oh, Sam," I breathed. "I'm so sorry." He just shook his head, a gesture of profound fatigue. "It's not even that," he said. I was in this hotel. It was nice, you know? Fancy. And I was standing at the window, looking out over the city, and I just had this feeling, this thought, that if I disappeared right then, it would take a week for anyone to even notice. My contact at the client company would wonder why I missed a meeting. Housekeeping would eventually find me, but no one would miss me. Not really. The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I would notice. I would notice in 5 minutes. He looked at me, and his expression softened. A flicker of the old Sam returned to his eyes. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you would. Leo." He pushed himself up into a sitting position and scrubbed his hands over his face. "I'm just so tired. I'm tired of the fake smiles and the handshakes and the beds that aren't my own. I'm tired of being on. All the time." He looked so lost, so adrift. All my carefully constructed walls, all my rules about distance and self-preservation, they all seemed like a monumental foolishness in the face of his pain. On instinct, I moved from the armchair to the couch, sitting beside him. I did not say anything. I just sat there, a solid presence in the quiet room. After a moment, he leaned his head against my shoulder. It was not a casual gesture. It was the deliberate act of a man seeking harbor from a storm. His body was tense at first, a collection of tight wires and guarded muscles. But as the minutes passed, I felt him begin to relax. The tension slowly seeped out of him, his breathing deepened, and the rigid line of his shoulders softened. We sat like that for over an hour, in total silence. The television was off. The city outside hummed its ceaseless lullaby. I was acutely aware of every point of contact between us. The solid weight of his head on my shoulder, the warmth of his arm pressed against mine, the side of his leg a steady line of heat against my own. My heart was doing a slow, heavy drum roll in my chest, but for the first time, it was not just from my own secret longing. It was from the profound, humbling privilege of being his safe place. I was the lighthouse, and he was the ship, battered and weary, finally finding his way home. That night was the catalyst. It was the moment the unspoken need was voiced, the moment he admitted he could not face his own empty space. From then on, my apartment was not just his home base, it was his sanctuary. The line between our lives, once so clearly drawn, began to blur. He was no longer just a visitor. He was a part of the landscape of my home. And with that shift, a new and dangerous ritual began to take root. The ritual began on the couch. It was an organic, unplannable thing, born from his exhaustion and my silent willingness. After that night, he confessed his loneliness. His returns from his trips took on a new pattern. He would come straight to my place, and we would fall into our old routine of a movie or just quiet talk. But now, inevitably, at some point in the evening, he would drift closer. The space between us on the sofa would shrink, and his head would find its now familiar place on my shoulder. The first few times, I was rigid with a mixture of terror and bliss. I was a bomb disposal expert, trying not to make a single move that might detonate the fragile piece. But he was so unselfconscious about it. He would simply lean against me, sigh a deep, contented breath, and let the weariness of his travels drain away. For him, it seemed to be an act as natural as breathing, a purely platonic seeking of comfort. Or so I told myself. I had to believe that. To believe otherwise was to invite a hope so vast it would swallow me whole. So I played my part. I was the sturdy, unmovable friend. The human pillow. I would sit perfectly still for hours, my own muscles cramping, my arm falling asleep, just so I would not disturb him. I would study the way a stray lock of his hair fell across his forehead, the faint stubble on his jaw, the gentle rise and fall of his chest. I was a curator of these forbidden intimacies, storing them away in the museum of my heart. The ritual escalated. One night, he fell deeply asleep on my shoulder. I let him sleep for an hour before gently trying to rouse him. "Sam," I whispered. "Hey, you should probably go home and get into a real bed." He mumbled something incoherent, shifting his weight and burrowing his face deeper into my neck. The feeling of his warm breath against my skin sent a jolt through my entire system. "Don't wanna," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. Too comfortable. My heart did a painful, hopeful flip. I looked at his sleeping face, so peaceful and unguarded, and I did not have it in me to push him away. So I did not. I just sat there, pinned to the couch, until my own exhaustion took over. I must have drifted off, because I woke a few hours later to the gray light of dawn filtering through the window. My neck was stiff, and my arm was completely numb, but Sam was still there, curled against me. In his sleep, he had shifted, slinging an arm across my waist, his hand resting on my hip. It was the most agonizingly beautiful thing I had ever experienced. To wake up with him holding me, even if it was an unconscious, meaningless act, felt like a glimpse into a life I could never have. I stayed completely still, not daring to breathe, trying to burn the memory of it into my mind. The weight of his arm, the solidness of his body against mine, the quiet intimacy of sharing the dawn. It was a perfect, painful photograph, and I was trying to expose it directly onto my soul. When he finally started to stir, I quickly and quietly disentangled myself, pretending I had been asleep in the armchair opposite. He woke up, stretched, and looked at me with a sheepish grin. "Whoops," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sorry, man. I totally crashed." "It's fine," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "You were obviously exhausted." "Your couch is a vortex," he laughed. A black hole of comfort. That became the new pretext. Crashing on my couch. It happened once, then again a few weeks later. Soon, it was almost expected. If he landed late, it was just assumed he would stay. I would leave a blanket and a pillow on the couch for him. I became an expert at navigating my apartment in the dark, stepping over his sleeping form on my way to the kitchen for a glass of water, my heart pounding with a dangerous tenderness. Then came the next escalation. The door left ajar. He had been staying on the couch for a couple of nights in a row during a particularly brutal week. I woke up around 3 a.m., thirsty. As I walked past my bedroom, I saw him standing in the hallway, silhouetted by the moonlight from the living room window. He was just standing there, looking towards my closed bedroom door. "Sam," I whispered, my voice startlingly loud in the silence. "You okay?" He jumped, turning towards me. "Oh, hey. Yeah, sorry. Didn't mean to wake you." He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "My back is killing me. Your couch is comfortable, but it's not that comfortable." An excuse. A plausible reason. But the way he had been staring at my door, it felt like more. A question hung in the air between us. An unspoken request. The threshold was right there, in the dark hallway. And I, the quiet observer, the man who never took a risk, I took one. You can take the bed," I said, my voice barely audible. "I can sleep on the couch. It's no big deal." He shook his head quickly. "No, man, I can't kick you out of your own bed. That's ridiculous. It's a king size," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. There's plenty of room. If you want." There it was. The invitation. Laid bare in the middle of the night. I held my breath, waiting for him to laugh it off, to retreat back to the safety of the couch. But he did not. He was quiet for a long moment. I could not see his expression in the dark, but I could feel his hesitation, his consideration. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I said, my heart feeling like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. "I'm sure." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." And so the ritual moved from the living room to the bedroom. That first night was pure, unadulterated torture. I lay on my side of the vast mattress, rigid as a board, my back to him. I was hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. The rustle of the sheets as he shifted his weight. The soft sound of his breathing. Closer now, so much closer. I felt like a tightly wound string on a violin, vibrating with a tension that was almost unbearable. I did not sleep at all. I just lay there, listening to him sleep, existing in the same space, separated by a few inches of mattress that felt like a continent. The next morning, we did not talk about it. We acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Slept like a rock," he said, stretching as he walked into the kitchen where I was making coffee. "Your bed is 1,000 times better than the couch." "Told you," I said, handing him a mug, my hand trembling slightly. And that was it. It became the new normal. When Sam was in town, he slept in my bed. The pretense of his bad back was mentioned once or twice more, and then forgotten entirely. It was just what we did. He had his side, I had mine. We were two continents, separated by a small sea of white sheets. But slowly, imperceptibly, the tectonic plates of our arrangement began to shift. The sea began to shrink. One night, I woke up to find his arm thrown over my chest, his face buried in my shoulder. My body went rigid, my first instinct to pull away, to restore the boundary. But I was half asleep, and my defenses were down. And it felt right. It felt like coming home. So I stayed. I let myself relax into it, let myself accept the comfort. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of him, a mixture of my soap and his own unique, familiar smell. When I woke up in the morning, he was still there. He woke up slowly, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at me, blinked, and for a split second, I saw a flash of panic in his eyes, a moment of "what have I done?" But then it was gone, replaced by a soft, sleepy smile. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice husky. He did not move away. He just stayed there, his arm still across my chest, looking at me. "Morning," I whispered back. That was the morning the continents touched. After that, the pretense of separation was gone. We would fall asleep on our separate sides, but by morning, we were always tangled together. His legs intertwined with mine, my hand resting on his back, his head on my chest. It was a slow, unconscious choreography that we danced every night. We never spoke of it. We never acknowledged it in the light of day. It was a secret language that our bodies spoke while our minds were asleep. The ritual became the center of my existence. My life was divided into two parts: the times Sam was here and the times he was not. When he was gone, my apartment felt cavernous and cold. My bed was a vast, empty expanse of white. I would lie awake at night, acutely aware of the absence of his warmth, the silence where his breathing should be. I would develop the photos I had taken, losing myself in the darkroom, trying to distract myself from the constant, aching hum of missing him. I was living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for him to come home. And when he was here, I was alive with a terrifying, vibrant intensity. Every moment was charged with meaning. Making him coffee in the morning, watching him shave in my bathroom, his face reflected next to mine in the mirror, the casual way he would touch my arm when he laughed at something I said. Every small intimacy was a treasure and a torment. I was drowning in a sea of unspoken things, and I was desperately, desperately happy. I knew it was a fragile, impossible bubble. I knew it could not last, but I was too deep in it to even want to find a way out. I was addicted to the beautiful, painful hope of it all. This ritual, this strange, intimate dance we were doing, it had become my entire world. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was leading somewhere. It was leading to a reckoning. It was leading to that rainy Tuesday night. And so we arrived back at the beginning, back to the couch, the rain, the flickering television, and the question that became a fault line, splitting my life into a before and an after. He had asked, "Do you ever think about me naked?" And my silence was a cavernous, echoing thing. It was a space filled with a decade of unspoken love, of carefully guarded secrets, of nights spent listening to him breathe in my bed. My silence was not an absence of an answer. It was the answer itself, in its most pure and terrifying form. Watching him pull his sweatshirt over his head was like watching someone calmly step off a cliff, trusting that the air would hold them. It was an act of such profound, reckless vulnerability that it stole the breath from my lungs. He sat there, bare-chested in the cool air of my apartment, his skin a pale canvas in the shifting light from the screen. His eyes were locked on mine, and in them I saw it all. The fear, the hope, the same desperate question he had just voiced, now reflected in the tension of his shoulders, the nervous stillness of his hands. He was not just showing me his body. He was showing me his heart, laid bare and beating, and he was asking, silently, if I would hold it or if I would let it fall. My own heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, suddenly went still. The frantic panic subsided, replaced by a strange, crystalline clarity. The fear was still there, a cold stone in the pit of my stomach, but it was no longer the dominant force. The dominant force was him. The sight of him, so open and so trusting, so willing to risk everything on my response. For years, I had been the quiet observer, the photographer documenting life from a safe distance. I framed moments. I did not live in them. I was terrified of blurring the image, of shaking the camera, of ruining the perfect, painful composition of our friendship. But he had just shattered the frame. He had walked into my carefully composed shot and was demanding that I put the camera down and participate. He was asking me to be as brave as he was. I took a breath. It felt like my first. I slowly, deliberately, reached out my hand. I did not move toward his face or his chest. I moved it to his hand, which was resting, clenched into a fist, on his knee. I gently unfolded his fingers with my own and laced them together. His hand was cold, and he was trembling slightly. Or maybe I was. I could not tell where his tremor ended and mine began. I held his gaze. All the time, I whispered. The words were a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. The tension in his shoulders eased, and the fear in his eyes was replaced by a dawning, wondrous light. He squeezed my hand, a silent, grateful pressure. He started to speak, to say my name, but I shook my head slightly, cutting him off. Words felt clumsy and inadequate. We had lived in a world of unspoken things for so long, and in this moment, the silence felt more honest. I brought his hand to my lips and pressed a soft kiss to his knuckles. It was an act of reverence, an oath. He watched me, his expression unreadable but soft. He leaned in, slowly, tentatively, closing the small gap between us. He was giving me every opportunity to pull back, to stop him. His face was inches from mine now. I could feel the warmth of his breath, could see the tiny flecks of gold in his dark eyes. The world narrowed to this single point, this space between our lips. The rain on the window, the movie on the screen, the entire city outside. It all faded away into a distant, muffled hum. "Leo," he breathed, his voice a question. Would it be okay? It was the question of a man who had been taught that this was not something he was allowed to want. It was the question of a man terrified of crossing a line he had just finished erasing. I did not answer with words. I closed the final inch between us. The kiss was not passionate or hungry or demanding. It was a question and an answer. It was tentative. It was unbelievably soft. It was the feeling of a long-held breath finally being released. It was just the gentle pressure of his lips against mine, a moment of stillness, of arrival. It tasted of rain and salt and a decade of waiting. It was the most profound conversation we had ever had. When we broke apart, we did not move away. We rested our foreheads together, our hands still entwined. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His skin was warm against mine. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my temple. He felt it with his thumb and made a soft, wounded sound in the back of his throat. "Hey," he whispered. Please don't cry. I'm not sad." I managed to say, my voice thick. I've waited a very long time for this." His breath hitched. "Me too," he said, and his voice was full of a surprise that broke my heart. I think I have, too. I just didn't let myself know it. That was it. That was the core of it all. He was the unknowing initiator. He had been moving toward me, driven by a deep, instinctual need for a home he could not name. He had been knocking on a door without realizing it was his own. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, simply breathing each other in. The ritual of the couch, the ritual of the bed, the unspoken language of our sleeping bodies, it had all been leading to this quiet, earth-shattering moment of acknowledgement. The crossing had been made. We were on the other side of the threshold now, standing in a new and unfamiliar room, and the only thing I knew for sure was that I was not alone in it. He was here with me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that he was here to stay. The morning after was a study in quiet terror. I woke up first, as I always did. The first thing I was aware of was the warmth. Sam was wrapped around me, his arms slung possessively over my waist, his face buried in the space between my shoulder blades, his legs tangled with mine. This was our usual morning configuration, the unconscious intimacy our bodies had learned. But this morning, it was different. Last night had not been unconscious. Last night had been a choice. A deliberate, terrifying, beautiful choice. I lay perfectly still, my heart a frantic drum against the mattress. The gray light of dawn was beginning to seep into the room, painting everything in soft, uncertain shades. I was afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid that any motion would shatter the fragile perfection of the moment. I was afraid that the light of day would reveal the kiss to be a dream, a phantom limb of a hope I had amputated years ago. But he was real. The weight of his arm was real. The soft puff of his breath on my neck was real. I must have been holding my breath, because I let it out in a slow, shaky sigh. The movement, small as it was, disturbed him. He stirred behind me, his arm tightening around me for a moment before he went still. I could feel the exact moment he woke up. His body, which had been soft and pliant with sleep, suddenly tensed. The easy, unconscious closeness became a rigid, awkward proximity. He pulled his arm away as if he had been burned. He shifted, rolling onto his back, putting a careful 6 inches of space between us. The sudden cold that flooded the space was a physical pain. The silence in the room was deafening. It was not the comfortable silence of the night before. It was a thick, anxious fog. I could hear him breathing, a shallow, controlled sound. I kept my back to him, my eyes squeezed shut, pretending to be asleep. It was a coward's move, but I could not face the regret I was sure I would see on his face. I could not bear to see him retreat. After what felt like a lifetime, I heard the rustle of sheets as he sat up, then the soft thud of his feet hitting the floor. He stood there for a moment. I could feel his gaze on my back, a heavy, unreadable weight. I wanted to turn around, to say something, anything. But the words were trapped in my throat, choked by a rising tide of fear. He walked out of the bedroom without a word. I heard his footsteps in the living room, the sound of him gathering his things, the clink of his keys, the rustle of his jacket. Each sound was a nail being hammered into the coffin of the beautiful thing we had shared for a few brief hours. Then, the soft click of the front door closing. And he was gone. I lay there, staring at the wall, the pattern of the plaster swimming in my vision. The silence he left behind was a physical presence. It pressed in on me, suffocating me. The space in the bed beside me was not just empty, it was a void. A cold, gaping wound. My mind replayed the kiss, the conversation, his whispered confession. Had I imagined it? Had I misinterpreted everything? Had his vulnerability in the dark simply curdled into shame in the light of day? The hurt was a sharp, physical thing, but underneath it was a deeper, more profound ache. The terror that I had not just lost a potential lover, but that I had broken my friendship. The one thing I had sworn to protect at all costs. I had been so careful for so long, and in one night, I had gambled it all away. And I had lost. The next few days were a special kind of hell. I existed in a state of suspended agony. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would leap into my throat, only to plummet when it was a client or a spam call. I scrolled through our text history, a long, unbroken chain of easy banter and inside jokes, now frozen in time. The last message was from him, 3 days ago, from the airport. Landed. See you soon. A promise that now felt like a cruel joke. I tried to work. I went into my darkroom, the familiar smell of chemicals and the deep, comforting red of the safe light usually a balm to my soul. But I could not focus. I would stare at the blank paper floating in the developer tray, waiting for an image to appear, and all I could see was his face in the flickering television light. I ruined an entire batch of prints, my hands shaking too much to handle the tongs properly. He was a ghost in my apartment. I saw him everywhere. His favorite mug, sitting clean and lonely in the cupboard. The sweatshirt he had tossed on the arm of the couch, which I had not had the heart to move. The indent his head had left on the pillow next to mine. A pillow I now slept with clutched to my chest, trying to find some trace of his scent, of his presence. I was pathetic. I was heartbroken. After 4 days of radio silence, something inside me broke. The hurt and the fear congealed into a cold, hard knot of anger. An anger born of frustration and a deep, wounded sense of injustice. He had started this. He had asked the question. He had taken off his shirt. He had kissed me. He did not get to light the fire and then run from the building, leaving me to burn alone. Our friendship, our history, it deserved more than a cowardly disappearance into the dawn. My resolve hardened. I picked up my phone, my fingers moving with a decisiveness I had not felt in days. I did not text. I did not call. I opened a ride-sharing app and typed in the address of his sleek, empty apartment, the one he never wanted to go home to. The confrontation was not going to happen in my sanctuary. It was going to happen in his sterile, impersonal space. I needed to see him there, in the life he had built for himself, the life he was always running from. I needed to understand what, exactly, I was up against. I arrived at his building and took the elevator up to the 27th floor, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm of dread and determination. I stood outside his door, number 27B, and I knocked. I did not have a key to his place. He had one to mine. The symbolism of that was not lost on me. I heard movement inside, the sound of a lock turning. The door opened a few inches. He stood there, looking even worse than he had when he'd returned from London. He was wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. He looked at me, and his face was a mixture of shock, guilt, and a misery so profound it almost knocked the anger right out of me. "Leo," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "Are you going to let me in?" I asked, my own voice colder and steadier than I felt. He flinched, but he opened the door wider. I stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as I remembered it, stylish, impersonal, and cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a spectacular view of the city, but inside, it felt like a hotel suite that no one had ever truly lived in. A suitcase lay open on the floor, half unpacked. He closed the door behind me and leaned against it, as if he did not have the strength to stand on his own. He would not meet my eyes. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly. "What am I doing here?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. I think the better question is, what are you doing, Sam? Or rather, what were you doing 4 nights ago when you disappeared from my apartment without a word? Did you think I wouldn't notice? He winced, finally looking up at me. The pain in his eyes was raw. Of course I knew you'd notice. I couldn't. You couldn't what? I pressed, stepping closer. I was not shouting. My voice was low, but it was shaking with the force of my contained emotions. Couldn't face me? Couldn't handle what happened? You get to ask a question that turns my entire world upside down. You get to kiss me, and then you just get to run away and pretend it didn't happen? Is that how this works? No, he said, shaking his head, his voice cracking. No, it's not like that. Then what is it like, Sam? I demanded, my voice rising now. Tell me, because for 10 years, I have been your friend, your brother, your safe place to land. I have sat with you through every crisis, every breakup, every late-night confession. And I have done it while being quietly, hopelessly in love with you. I have buried it. I have hidden it. I have respected the boundaries of our friendship, because losing you is unthinkable. And then you crossed the line. You opened the door. And the moment I stepped through it with you, you slammed it in my face. So you owe me an explanation. You owe me more than just vanishing. The confession, the part about being in love with him, had just slipped out, a torrent of truth I could no longer hold back. The words hung in the air between us, stark and shimmering. Sam just stared at me, his face ashen. He looked utterly devastated. He pushed himself off the door and stumbled over to the window, turning his back to me, looking out at the city below. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Leo, I am so sorry. I'm a coward. I know, I said, the anger draining out of me, replaced by a vast, aching sadness. But I need to know why. He rested his forehead against the cool glass of the window. Because it felt too real, he said, his voice muffled. Lying there with you, kissing you, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a drunken impulse. It felt like the most honest thing I've ever done in my entire life. And that terrified me. He turned around to face me, and now the tears were silently streaming down his face. All my life, he continued, his voice breaking, I've been playing a part. The successful consultant. The good son. The straight guy with the pretty girlfriend. It's a script I know, a costume I wear. And it's fine. But it's not real. The only place I've ever felt real is with you. In your apartment. On your couch. In your bed. He took a shaky breath. I didn't understand it. I just knew I needed to be there. I needed that quiet, that safety. I needed you. And I told myself it was just friendship. Because the alternative meant that my entire life, everything I've built, is a lie. That the person I'm supposed to be isn't the person I am. Waking up next to you, he whispered, after that kiss. I looked at you, and I felt home, in a way I have never felt before. And the moment I felt it, I panicked. Because what does that mean? What do I do with that? It's easier to run back to this. He gestured around the empty, sterile apartment. To the script I know, than to face the beautiful, terrifying truth that you were offering me. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I didn't run away from you, Leo, he said, his voice cracking with the weight of his confession. I ran away from myself. His confession hung in the air, a fragile, shimmering thing. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world cracking apart. I watched him, this man I knew better than I knew myself, as he stood there utterly undone, his face streaked with tears, his body trembling with the force of his own revelation. The anger I had carried with me on the elevator ride up had completely evaporated, washed away by a tidal wave of empathy. I was not looking at a coward who had broken my heart. I was looking at a man who was lost, a man who had been running for so long he had forgotten what he was running from. I closed the distance between us, my footsteps soft on the polished hardwood floor. I stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the frantic, terrified pulse beating in his throat. I reached out, not with anger, but with a gentleness I did not know I possessed, and I wiped a tear from his cheek with my thumb. He flinched at the contact, but did not pull away. He just stood there, letting me touch him, his eyes squeezed shut as if he could not bear to look at me. Sam, I said, my voice quiet but firm, a lighthouse beam in his storm. Look at me. He slowly, hesitantly, opened his eyes. They were filled with so much pain and confusion and self-loathing that it took my breath away. I wrecked it, he whispered. I wrecked the best thing in my life because I was scared. No, I said, shaking my head. You didn't wreck it. You just put a very large crack in it. But it's not broken. Not yet. I took his hand, his fingers cold and limp in mine. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to rewrite the script of your entire life in one afternoon. You just have to do one thing. What? He asked, his voice barely audible. Stop running, I said simply. Just for a minute. Just stand still. With me. He stared at me, his breath catching in his throat. I could see the war raging inside him. The instinct to flee, to retreat back into the safety of his known life, warring with the profound, magnetic pull of the truth he had just confessed. It was the most important photograph I would ever take, this moment, and I could only hope it would develop into something beautiful. Slowly, so slowly, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He did not pull his hand away. He squeezed mine, a faint, questioning pressure. It was not a solution. It was not a promise. But it was a start. It was a choice to stay. Okay, he breathed. Okay. And so began the slow, painstaking work of healing. It was not a grand, cinematic reconciliation. It was a quiet, domestic process, built of small gestures and hesitant conversations. I did not leave his apartment that day. I stayed. I ordered takeout, and we ate it sitting on the floor, the city lights twinkling below us like a fallen constellation. We did not talk about us, we just talked. About his trip, about a new gallery I had visited, about a stupid movie we both wanted to see. We were rebuilding the bridge between us, plank by plank. That night, he did not ask me to stay, and I did not offer. But as I was getting ready to leave, he stopped me at the door. Don't go back to an empty apartment, he said quietly, echoing my own words to him from so long ago. Stay? Please, he looked terrified, as if he expected me to say no. The couch. I asked, a gentle test. He shook his head, a flicker of the old Sam, the determined one, in his eyes. No, he said, not the couch. That night, we lay in his bed, a bed in an apartment that finally felt like it might become a home, and we just held each other. There were no kisses, no grand pronouncements. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was the quiet, solid comfort of his body next to mine, his head resting on my chest, his arm around my waist. It was the feeling of his breathing, slow and steady now, a rhythm that matched my own. It was a silent promise to not run away in the morning. The new normal was not a destination we arrived at, but a path we started walking together. Sam began to travel less. He talked to his company, leveraged his value, and carved out a new role for himself, one that kept him closer to home. He started unpacking the suitcases that had been a permanent fixture in his life. He started filling his apartment with things that were not just functional, but personal. Books, plants. He even framed one of my photographs, the one of him on the bench from college, looking out over the lake, and hung it on his wall. We spent our time moving between our two apartments, blurring the lines until they ceased to exist. My sanctuary became our sanctuary. His once sterile apartment became our shared space. We learned a new language, one spoken not in the dark or in our sleep, but in the bright, clear light of day. It was a language of good morning, kisses over coffee, of hands held while walking down the street, of quiet evenings on the couch where the closeness was not an accident or a ritual of plausible deniability, but a deliberate, joyful choice. One Saturday morning, months later, I was in the kitchen of my apartment, making pancakes. Sam came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder, watching me pour the batter onto the griddle. It was a gesture that had once been the peak of a forbidden intimacy, something to be analyzed and agonized over. Now it was just us. It was the easy, comfortable grammar of our life together. You know, he said quietly into my ear, his voice warm and content. I was so afraid. I thought that if I admitted what I felt, I would lose everything. My life, my career, our friendship. I leaned back against him, flipping a pancake. And I did lose it, he said. I lost a life I didn't even want. And I gained the only one I ever really needed. He kissed the side of my neck, a soft, sure gesture. I found my home. I turned in his arms to face him, my hands covered in a light dusting of flour. I looked at his face, at the easy smile that now always reached his eyes, at the love that shone there, open and unafraid. The ghost was gone. The performer had left the stage. This was just Sam. My Sam. And I was just Leo. His Leo. "Welcome home," I said, and then I kissed him, a kiss that tasted of maple syrup and sunlight and the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. We learned, eventually, that a home is not a place. It is not four walls and a roof. It is not a familiar couch or a bed with a certain thread count. A home is a harbor. It is the quiet certainty of being seen, of being known. It is the safe space where you can finally take off the costume you have been wearing and just be. For years, I had been a keeper of moments, a silent observer from the edge of the frame. I thought that was my role. But life, in its infinite and surprising wisdom, has a way of showing you that the most beautiful pictures are the ones you were brave enough to step into. The threshold that once seemed so terrifying was not an ending, but a beginning. It was the doorway to a room I had been searching for my entire life, a room filled with light and laughter and the profound, simple peace of being truly, completely home.